My name is Chandler, and I'm the managing director of or the founder of a company, Lean Systems and Projects. The company was started after I retired, and Hesto asked if I could come back and work for a year, but obviously I didn't want to work in my normal role as clocking in at 8 o'clock and leaving at 4:30. So we agreed that I would start my own PTY and be able to charge them for hours worked rather than working as an employee. Well, I've been a Warnabeach Toti boy since grade 1. So I attended Warnabeach Primary School and Kingsway High School in Toti. Later on, I attended the Durban Technikon as part of a 4-year program with South African Railways and Harbours, Civil Engineering Assistant Program. My first job was working as an assembly operator, assembling big trucks. And I was working those big international harvester trucks back in the day. The railways used to have them. My father was the sales engineer at International Harvester, and he decided that I should learn to assemble trucks before I began as an engineer. But later on, he fired me, and I applied for South African Railways and Harbours to drive a truck. And I was explained that those jobs are reserved for people with low education. So I didn't accept that. Although I didn't have a great matric result, but I couldn't accept that having a matric could exclude me from driving trucks. So they said, could I do an aptitude test? So I thought the test was to drive the trucks. But 2 weeks later, I get a letter telling me to report to Durban Central Station. I'd been accepted onto the South African Railways and Harbour Trainee Civil Engineering Program. I needed to report to a place called Doop School and Germiston Hostel. And so my first real job was 5 years as a trainee civil engineering technician. A job that I didn't even know existed when I got it. Well, from there I left and I joined Toyota. I actually went into Toyota to get a CV for some holiday job I'd done, and they asked whether I would stay and become a buyer. And after a lot of negotiation, I changed and joined them as a buyer back in 1980. Currently, I've been acting as MD since 2023 with a Toyota supplier that's been placed into business rescue. That position came out of the blue. So now I'm working there 4 days a week and 1 day a week with the other smaller suppliers. So I retired from Hesto Harnesses in June 2021. That's 10 years MD and 20 years in total. And I stayed on until December 2021 to create a more smooth handover for the new MD. So my wife and I tested out a camper van on the West Coast, and that had always been the long-term plan. But a week into the journey, I received a call from Hesto asking if we could help implement a Kanban logistics. And to be honest, I was quite excited by the offer of going back into where I'd started off as, which is Kanban and logistics. And so strangely, the camper van took second place to going back to work where I'd always worked. But I also wanted the freedom of retirement. So rather than get onto a payroll, we agreed I'd be employed via a company, Lean Systems and Projects. And that way I could work flexi hours and not possibly as a normal employee. So I worked for Hesto for the entire of 2022, doing layouts and systems and other designs. But during this time, I started to receive a lot of requests from other automotive suppliers. It's a very small world, this automotive industry. And could I come and have a look at their factories? Hesto had always been a benchmark in terms of TPS and lean systems. And every time I'd get excited by going into these different factories. Jadelle was one of them. She came to see me one day and said, could I come and help her in her factory? So some of them I just adopted as no pay type of jobs. Others paid me, so I ended up earning a reasonable salary. And but the other spare time, I'd be going into factories and in the clothing industry and the chemical industry and all sorts. So that really just became what I was interested. I think that my purpose is really to see factories grow and sustain and increase jobs in a country that desperately needs to have jobs. And it's probably always has been like that since I began at Toyota. So that undoubtedly is back in 1980, 1981. I'd only just joined as a buyer, and we were struggling for South African government had put in the local content ruling of 60%. Toyota went from number 5 to number 1, and our suppliers couldn't keep up. So I was a very young buyer, and especially the wiring harnesses were struggling to keep up. But a Toyota director asked if, and I'm not sure how serious he was, he said, can an outside sourced auto electrician make a wiring harness factory? I was too young to question any of that. So I asked an auto electrician, and he said yes, he could, but he would need about 3,000 square meter factory. So we started to make wiring harnesses, and within 6 months, he was supplying about 80% of the Cressida. If you see a Toyota Cressida, 80% chance that it's got one of these wiring harnesses in it. But we didn't know anything about wiring harnesses. We didn't know anything about manufacturing. So we copied the Toyota way of producing a car, sort of assembly lines, designed some assembly lines. Every night I'd go and work in this factory. And then we found that although we could make harnesses, we couldn't get the parts or the cut wires there in time. So we devised some sort of strange tube-in racking system, which we found out a long time after that when a Japanese visited, that this was very similar to Toyota Japan, and that what he'd seen there was equal to Toyota Japan. What he'd seen in South Africa was very far from Japan. So I think, so what makes me proud with that? Well, I was very young, number one, and working every night after work, we were designing something from scratch, something we knew nothing about. We did something that would nowadays be considered irresponsible and impossible. In other words, to start something from scratch to become a major supplier to Toyota. We managed to keep the Toyota Cressida lines going when at first that seemed impossible. And we designed a pull system and a conveyor system. And I think I was about 26 at the time. So I think that's always stayed with me, that sometimes being a bit stupid and just allocating stuff to young guys, they can get it done so long as you allocate it to them, which this director had done. He just said, go and get the job done. I don't think there's one best advice, and the more I think about it, the more I can come up with. But I think maybe a good one was on my start to the the manufacturing journey, which is about 50 years now. So I went back to Toyota to get a CV to join Grenica. I was leaving Transnet or SARNH. I needed the CV, but a Toyota buyer, and he was just a senior buyer, he tried to convince me to join them as an electrical buyer because he saw on my CV I had done electricity. It was just principles of electricity, so it meant I probably knew which is a positive and a negative on the wire. But so I explained that I'd invested the 5 years into civil, and but the job excited me. So his reply was, "You're going to regret not taking the job. Why don't you just do it?" So I followed his advice, and for many years I kept on hearing this, "Why don't you just do it?" Whenever I was thinking about two options or a third option, or I found an excuse, he would just ask me, "Why don't you just do it?" And so this, I think that's followed me through my life. If you go to history, everybody knows that I adopted this saying now as well. And when people are not sure about which direction, it comes down to just, why don't you just do it? If I'm having an argument and I'm losing the battle, and I want them to do it anyway. It's just, why don't you just do it? And I think that was probably, he had a very distinct accent, and it stayed in my head, and it's still in my head now, 50 years later. Why don't you just do it? So remember also in that period, I was given the responsibility of starting up a wiring harness company. In fact, it was expected of me. So I found that there was a high level of delegation at that time and a high level of just do it. So I don't ever remember being intimidated by this responsibility. It just seemed a natural way to just do it if you needed to get something done. It was their style before Toyota became a Japanese company. Yeah, so probably 2010, I'd just been promoted to MD of Hesto. And we were not doing well in any of the major metrics of quality, cost, delivery, or shareholder profits. And our customer hinted quite strongly that the next generation model, launching in 4 years' time, would probably not have a Hesto harness in it. So that year, I watched as a new competitor came in, and we went to the supplier awards, and I left with empty-handed, and the competitor walked away with, well, so many. I've never seen anybody walk off with as many as that. So after the awards, we gathered at the bar, and one of the customer senior managers came up to me and asked if I was happy, like kind of ha-ha. And what was I going to do about it is the sourcing was going to be completed soon. So to be honest, I didn't know. I didn't know. I mean, somehow the award stuck in my mind, and they indicated that's what the customer wanted from us. He'd got a lot and we'd got none. So they had awards for quality, safety, cost planning, VA, plus a few others. So my thinking was, if we could target some of those, we would have the required turnaround. But the plan targets an actual turnaround and needed to be very quick. We didn't have time, and to be honest, I didn't even know where to start. So the next day we called a meeting with this new, quite young team. We allocated process owners to each award, and even after that wasn't enough. We needed to kind of get the whole workforce on board, which is about 1,700 at that point. So we called a mass meeting and explained that we were about 50% too expensive, bad quality, bad shipment, bad safety. And we're giving also the shareholder almost zero return on invested capital. So we can't fund price from profits. So we explained to them we had very little time to change, but we needed to change if we wanted to protect jobs. So the request was simple, that everybody just takes ownership for their part of that factory. 1,700 people, each look after themselves. If nobody made a defect, our quality would be perfect. If nobody fell down a staircase or cut themselves, we would have perfect safety. So we handed the improvement to each employee and trained everybody on the TPS model, which is basically ownership of the space around you, working in teams, speed of response, escalation system, and checklist. So we just trained on those 4 very basics. So a few weeks later, I presented the plan to Toyota. More like I said, of targets, it wasn't a plan. And we agreed to meet in a few months. Our customer asked that we keep the same plan with its 32 items for the next meeting. And the next meeting, we had 31 smiley faces. That doesn't mean we'd achieved everything, but we were on track with everything. So we kept the same plan for 4 years. And after 4 years, we had achieved everything. In the meantime, the customer visited Hesto, spoke to our employees, realized they were fully aligned with the top level plans, and we retained the next generation vehicle. So in years to come, we won more awards than any other supplier. And each time we would share these awards with the people and who had actually earned them, which is those guys on the shop floor. So every time we gave them the awards, we had a special trolley made. They could all stand next to it with all the awards, and then you'd find that Facebook would light up. Suddenly Hesto would be trending all over South Africa. It was their awards. I think employees need a greater purpose than arriving at work to earn a wage or a salary. In Hesto, they know that they created the jobs by being the best. At one point, we had created 10,800 jobs in the Lembe area, and the employees were well aware that they had achieved that. They've got a role, management's got a role, they play theirs, management must play theirs. So these employees are very proud of their achievements, and the community was very proud of their company as well, and these employees. So in Technique, the company I'm running now, they know that only they can create a new technique, a company that's going to survive the business rescue. So we still have conflicts. You mentioned there, how do we, we have lots of conflicts. That's normal, but far less than would be the case prior to the business rescue, where they were very divided into which of the two directors they would follow. So we've got a slogan now that's called One Team, One Direction. And that alone is a reminder to jump the obstacles together. But then I think the second part is just make sure everybody's got a well thought out structure and role and responsibility in the organization. Be very clear on what your job is. So for instance, the role of an engineer is to work with an operator to produce the best quality part in the least time, the best ergonomics and the best safety. Many engineers don't think this, and they blame operators when things go wrong. So the structure has got to be formed so that it forms into these teams as it would in the normal Toyota way. As you said, your teamwork and your ownership sits together as a bracketed two words, if you want to call it that. Yeah, so many people do, and I've thought about Nelson Mandela and all these guys, but honestly speaking, most of the guys that inspired me, I've worked for in the past. But maybe my biggest inspiration is Ralph Broadley. Ralph Broadley was MD of Toyota Manufacturing for, I think, 20 years or something like that. So I was intimidated by him as a young guy. I never spoke to him. But I used to love listening to him speak, and molded a lot of my thinking on the way Ralph thought. So later he became a non-executive director at Mete, and he became my mentor when I became MD of Hesto. And even after he retired in his mid-80s, Ralph continued to provide a lot of advice to me. And even now at 91, he'll still phone me up and he'll get hold of me, whether I'm getting too fat or whatever the thing is. He just keeps you on track. But I think it was a great partnership when you've got a director and mentor is the same person who inspires you. So during my 10 years as MD, Ralph kept me grounded, but he was also a very strong conduit to the Mete board. Being good friends with Brunt Pretorius and all those top guys, if he believed what I was saying, somehow it would just happen. So he became a conduit directly into the Mete board, and he always managed to sell it to whichever relevant Mete director, MD, or even complete board of directors in a way I could never have done. So I think the conduit is missing in many companies, and I was just very lucky to have the MD of my youth as my non-executive director and mentor. Yeah, so Grant, I don't believe that South Africa has anywhere near reached its potential. Yeah, I believe that the workforce is equal to any in the world, and I've traveled the world looking at workforce doing the same job as we did, making harnesses and other. And the workforce is the workforce. The fact that we've got unemployment, very often you look at them and you can see ours is a cut above, because we are getting people with matrics and in some cases even degrees working. So we live in a relatively low-cost country, and we've got a key differentiator, which is a weak currency. So if we can create the same process design, the same production system, the same capital investment, and vertical integration or localization, we will compete with anybody in the world. We showed that with Hesto after Toyota told us we were too expensive, and we were finally forced to accept that it wasn't them making a mistake or we had some excuse because we're South Africans. When we finally got down to it, and they said, look, we will resource from you. We became competitive with best in the world in terms of cost and everything else. So I think a lot of us in South Africa continuously look for the price up to compensate for increasing costs, as opposed to looking to a way to solve your inflation issues. So very simply, and you can see what I'm talking about here, if you compare a South African McDonald's burger with any other McDonald's burger in the world, it's the cheapest. But then all McDonald's burgers use the same recipe. They all have all their localized buns and meat is localized. We don't import anything. They've all got the same manufacturing process, they've got the same equipment, and they've got the same training. But South Africa's got the competitive advantage of the weak currency. So being a great differentiator. The only thing, of course, we can't export burgers, but we can use it as an example that we can compete. So often, though, we have different processes in South Africa. We've got different CapEx. We don't spend the CapEx. We don't train the guys. We've got untrained management, and we try to compete in other products. So we need to keep abreast of global best practice like McDonald's and we need to localize. So let's do that localization here in KZN. I think that's kind of where Toyota is aiming for. But I think we need a lot of support to make sure that it happens. So I think basically, maybe the impossible is only normally impossible if we don't, as a full team, start the journey. I think just saying just do it is not enough. But you've got to somehow integrate the team into how can we just do it as a team.